Today, we're going to dig into the story of a weapon that was supposed to be a total game changer for American troops, a gun that looked absolutely perfect on paper, but turned into a soldier's worst nightmare in the thick of a fight. This is the story of the Reising submachine gun, and it's a heck of a cautionary tale about innovation during World War II.
So let me just start with a question that really frames this whole thing. Picture this. You're a Marine, you're on some remote island in the Pacific, and you're surrounded by the enemy. You've just been handed a brand new, state-of-the-art submachine gun. So why on earth would you be desperate to ditch it for an older, heavier, and much more expensive model? That's the whole mystery of the Reising, and we're about to unpack it. To really get what happened here, we need to hop in a time machine and go back to the early days of World War II. America was gearing up for a truly massive conflict, and that meant one thing above all else. They needed a ton of weapons, and they needed them yesterday.
I mean, the clock was seriously ticking. Now you had the famous M1 Thompson, which was a great gun, but it was from another time. It was complicated and really expensive to make. The military was crying out for something cheaper, something faster to produce, something they could get into the hands of literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And that kind of pressure cooker environment, well, it was the perfect opening for a new design to steal the show.
And steal the show, it did. Or at least it tried to. Enter Eugene Reising, a firearms designer who came forward with what seemed like a brilliant, elegant solution, the M50 Reising submachine gun. And let me tell you, on paper, this thing looked like the answer to all their prayers. Just take a look at these numbers. The choice seems like a no-brainer, right? The Thompson cost over $200 back in 1942, which was a lot of money. The Reising? A measly $62. It was a steal. Plus, it was 4 pounds lighter, and, this is a big deal, its closed bolt design made it way more accurate. So you've got cheaper, lighter, and more precise. On paper, it was an absolute slam dunk.
And you can totally see why the top brass was so excited. The Reising was being sold as this huge leap forward in technology. You had advanced engineering for better performance, it was lighter so soldiers wouldn't get as tired, and you could just crank these things out on the assembly line. It was perfect for the massive scale of the war.
You can just feel the pride behind its creation. This wasn't just another gun. People saw it as a finely tuned instrument, a masterpiece, a symbol of modern American engineering. But, as we are about to find out, the battlefield has a way of humbling even the most brilliant designs. All right, so let's leave the clean, sterile world of the factory and head out to the real proving ground. We're talking about the brutal, unforgiving jungles of the Pacific Theater. This is where the Reising's perfect reputation was about to get its ultimate and final test.
And wow, this timeline tells a pretty damning story. In August of '42, the Marines hit the beaches of Guadalcanal carrying these brand new Reisings. It did not take long for the cracks to show. By September, just a month later, reports of malfunctions are trickling in. By November, it's a full-blown crisis. The gun just stopped working.
And this right here is the heart of the issue. A weapon can work flawlessly on a firing range, under perfect, controlled conditions. But war isn't clean. It's not controlled. It's mud, it's rain, it's salt, it's sand getting into absolutely everything. And in that environment, the Reising failed. Catastrophically. The jungle delivered its verdict, and it was brutal. That sophisticated, finely tuned mechanism, turns out a single grain of sand could jam it solid. The metal rusted like crazy in the humid, salty air. Key parts would just bend or snap. And because it was so complex, a Marine couldn't just strip it down and clean it in a foxhole. It became a liability, a 7-pound paperweight at the exact moment your life depended on it.
And this is the central, almost cruel irony of the Reising story. The very thing that made it seem so amazing on paper, its incredible precision, its tight engineering, that was the exact reason it failed so miserably in the real world. It was simply too delicate for the ugly, messy business of war.
So, what happens to a wonder weapon that completely fails its first big test? Well, the Reising's fall from grace was just as fast as its rise to fame. Let's take a look at its final chapter. This pretty much lays out the whole sad journey. After getting yanked from the front lines, the Reisings were sent as far away from mud and sand as possible. They were handed over to guards at naval bases, used in training exercises, and issued to some police departments back home. After the war, thousands were just sold as surplus, becoming this weird little historical curiosity for gun collectors. So, what's the Reising's real legacy? Well, it's not a story of victory or heroism on the battlefield. It's a lesson. It's a powerful reminder that in high-stakes situations, simple and reliable is almost always better than complex and innovative. The best tool isn't the fanciest one. It's the one that works every single time.
And that leaves us with one last thought, one that goes way beyond this one gun. The story of the Reising really makes you think. In any field, right? Tech, business, whatever. Where is that thin line between creating something that's brilliantly complex and creating something that's just fatally over-engineered? It's a really important question to think about.
And believe me, in the early days of the war, the United States was facing a gigantic industrial headache.
And this was the heart of the problem. You're trying to build an army of millions of people, and you need to give them guns, like yesterday. But what happens when your main submachine gun, your best one, is basically a handcrafted work of art? Well, you've got a huge problem, because you just can't mass-produce a masterpiece.
And that masterpiece was the legendary Thompson submachine gun. You know, the Tommy gun. It's famous, it's iconic, and it's a beautiful piece of engineering. But here's the thing about Total War. It was a Cadillac, and the Army desperately needed a whole fleet of Jeeps. Just look at this breakdown. It tells you everything you need to know. A single Thompson cost around $200 back in 1942. You know what that is today? That's over $3,500. It was carved, literally milled out of solid blocks of steel. That's a slow, painstaking process. It was an incredible gun, no doubt, but it was a bottleneck. America needed millions of guns, not thousands. So what do? You got to throw out the old playbook. Forget the fine, old-world craftsmanship. You need something radical, something incredibly practical. You need a $20 solution.
And this is where the thinking completely flips. The problem wasn't given to traditional gunsmiths. No, it was given to the people who really understood mass production, car companies. A gun designer named George Hyde teamed up with, of all places, General Motors. The goal? Let's build a gun the same way we stamp out fenders and hubcaps.
And here's the result of that crazy idea. About $20. That's it. We're talking a 90% drop in cost. For the price of just one Thompson, you could now arm 10 soldiers with its replacement. Now that is an equation that helps you win a war.
And this was the gun. The M3. Now, officially, it had a very boring name. But the GIs who got it? They took one look at this crude, tube-shaped, industrial-looking thing and thought, hey, that looks just like the grease gun we use on the Jeeps. And the name just stuck. The grease gun was born.
All right, so this new approach led to one of the fastest production stories of the entire war. But how exactly did they make this thing so fast? And once it was made, who actually ended up carrying it into battle?
The whole process was just genius in how simple it was. You literally take two pieces of sheet metal, put them in a massive press, clank, and stamp them into shape. Then you weld those two halves together, screw on a barrel, clip on a flimsy-looking wire stock, and that's it. You have a gun. It was rough, yeah, but you could pump them out like there was no tomorrow. Now, because it was so cheap and compact, the M3 wasn't for every single soldier. It was perfect for guys who needed a small personal defense weapon. Think about it. Tank crews crammed inside a turret. Paratroopers who needed something light and foldable for the jump. Truck drivers. Even spies from the OSS who needed a firearm they could hide easily. Okay, so it all sounds pretty good, right? Cheap, fast, and easy to make. But let's be real. When you rush something into production like this, there are going to be problems. And the first grease guns to hit the field definitely had some, glitches. Yeah, those early models had issues. They had this weird, fragile crank handle on the side to cock it, which had a nasty habit of breaking. The sights were basically just a tiny hole and a metal nub. The magazines would sometimes jam up, and maybe the scariest part, if you dropped it just right, it could go off by itself. So, yeah, it was a tool that needed some serious fine-tuning.
And that fine-tuning came in the form of the M3A1. And this is a perfect example of engineers actually listening to the soldiers on the front line. They got rid of that stupid crank handle. You know how you cock the new one? You just stuck your finger in a hole in the bolt and pulled it back. They made the whole thing safer and more reliable. And the craziest part? They made a super simple gun even simpler, and by doing that, they made it a whole lot better.
So you'd think a cheap, stamped metal gun, basically a disposable weapon built for one war, it would probably just vanish once the war was over, right? Well, the story of the grease gun's career is probably the most surprising thing about it.
Just take a look at this timeline. It's wild. The M3 and the improved M3A1 didn't just fight in World War II. They were right there in the freezing cold of Korea. They were in the jungles of Vietnam. And get this, they were still being issued to some American tank crews almost 50 years later during the first Gulf War in the 1990s. This throwaway gun just refused to quit.
And that really gets to the very heart of the grease gun story. Was it the best submachine gun ever made? No way. Not the most accurate, definitely not the prettiest. But you know what? It worked. And, most importantly, it was there, in huge numbers, right when it was needed. Its greatest feature wasn't its design, it was its availability.
In the end, the M3 Grease Gun is this amazing testament to American industrial pragmatism. It wasn't a weapon born out of a love for craftsmanship. It was born out of pure, desperate necessity. It wasn't pretty, but it was there when you needed it. It put a simple, effective tool into the hands of millions of soldiers, and that is a powerful lesson. Sometimes, good enough is exactly what you need to win.
You know, some things are more than just objects. They become legends, and that's what we're talking about today. The Thompson submachine gun. It wasn't just a gun. It was the trench broom, the Chicago typewriter. It was an icon for both the good guys and the bad guys. This weapon didn't just fight in a war. It helped define an entire era.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with how this icon was born. Then we'll look at how it was forged in the factory. After that, we'll see it in action as a war-winning weapon, but we'll also talk about its heavy burden. And finally, we'll see how it went from the battlefield to become a true legend.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? How does a piece of metal and wood, a machine, become something more, something mythical? The story of the Thompson? Well, I think it holds the answer. So let's dive in.
All right, so our story doesn't actually begin on a battlefield. It starts on a drawing board with a really big problem that desperately needed a solution. I want you to just picture the absolute nightmare of World War I trench warfare. Just this brutal, grinding stalemate. The Tommy gun was born out of that chaos. It was designed to be a trench broom, a weapon that was so portable and so powerful it could let one single soldier clear out a whole trench and, hopefully, break that deadly deadlock for good.
But, an idea is one thing. Actually turning that idea into a reliable weapon that you can count on in a war, that's a whole different ballgame. The journey from the blueprint to the battlefield was, honestly, a marvel of industrial engineering.
And listen, this was not some stamped-out cheap weapon. No way. Each Thompson was a piece of craftsmanship. They were forged from solid steel, milled with incredible precision, and finished with that classic wood stock. But all that quality, well, it came at a steep price. It made production really slow and really expensive.
So what was the secret sauce? At the very heart of the Thompson was its heavy bolt system. You can think of it like the engine of the gun. This thing was robust, it was complex, and it made the gun incredibly reliable, even in all the dirt and mud of a battle. But that heavy design, as we're about to see, came with a heavy price.
So, the gun is finally built and ready to go, and it gets its chance to prove itself in the biggest conflict in human history, World War II. This quote, it just captures the feeling on the ground perfectly. For the soldiers who are actually carrying this thing, the Thompson wasn't just a gun. It was a game changer, an instrument of just overwhelming power when things got up close and personal.
And when you look at the raw numbers here, you really get why. I mean, look at that rate of fire. About 700 rounds a minute compared to a standard rifle's 15. Can you imagine? In the total chaos of clearing a building, that's not just a slight advantage. It's a revolution. The Thompson didn't just play the game, it completely changed the rules.
But all that incredible power didn't come for free. For every single advantage the Thompson gave you, there was a pretty serious drawback that the soldiers themselves had to deal with.
So what exactly was that trade-off? From a distance, the Thompson looked like a miracle weapon. But for the guy who had to haul it through miles of mud and rain, well, the reality was a lot more complicated.
Okay, let's break it down. On one hand, the good. The firepower was absolutely devastating. The intimidation factor? Unmatched. And it was rock-solid reliable. You could bet your life that it would work when you needed it most.
But then, you flip the coin. The bad. At nearly 11 pounds loaded, this thing was a beast to carry all day. The recoil from that heavy bolt made it a real struggle to control. And from a logistics point of view, a nightmare. It was just too expensive and too slow to build for a world at war, which is why simpler, cheaper submachine guns were eventually developed. It was a weapon that soldiers both loved and at times absolutely cursed.
So what happens to a weapon like that, a weapon defined by so many contradictions, when the war is over? Well, for the Thompson, the end of the fighting was really just the beginning of its second life as a true cultural icon.
You can really trace its journey through the decades. In the 40s, it's the symbol of the Allied soldier. By the 50s, Hollywood grabs it, and it becomes the star of war movies and gangster flicks. Fast forward to the 80s, it's a prized collector's item. And today, you'll find it behind glass in a museum, a true relic of a past era.
And you know, it's that look, right? That silhouette, the drum magazine, the thinned barrel, the wood grips. It's just instantly recognizable. It became more than a weapon. It became a symbol for a whole period of American history. It stands for grit, for sacrifice, and ultimately for victory.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The Thompson's incredible journey from a drawing board to a museum case proves that our creations, especially the ones forged in a crisis, are so much more than just tools. They become vessels for our stories. They reflect our values. They send a message to the future about who we were. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What stories will our tools tell about us?